everybody. Welcome to From the Ground Up, a podcast where we talk about all things autism, faith, and family. My name is Megan Haupert, and I am a board-certified behavior analyst. And I have my awesome and witty co-host here, Scott Gaulden, with me, who is a father of a child with autism and a wealth of knowledge. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Megan. I've been called a lot of names, but witty ain't one of them, okay? I'm honored that you find it that way, though. Thank you so much.
Hey, we're talking about extending grace tonight, so I just figured I'd start it off with using that flattery. So,
see, I thought we were going to talk about my favorite topic, which is how to get people to do what you really want them to do. Because that's really what we're going to talk about a little bit, isn't it?
That's the black and white way of saying it, I suppose.
It's hard in the world to be able to get people to do what you're ultimately asking them to do, and to do it in a way that's grace-filled and, let's say, holds up Jesus and holds up the example of Jesus as we do that. So it's no small task. It's no small topic. I hope everybody really enjoys it tonight. Maybe take something away from this about how to really advocate for your child, how to get the most out of what it is you need to take place. And it's hard for a lot of people. I deal with people all day long, and I've been in sales. I'm used to this. Not everybody's used to that, and it can be a very uncomfortable situation. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think when we talk about advocacy and we talk about autism, we always our brains automatically go to school or education and those types of settings. And I think it's really important that we have to think about we're advocating for our child on all kinds of different platforms, whether it be educational platform, whether it be a treatment platform with therapies. Maybe it's advocating for them out in the community or to be involved in different programs and things like that. And so I really want to dive into what are those steps we can take and things we need to focus on when we're talking about advocating for our children.
I like the idea. We have to be the voice of our child until they get one. We've got to be their voice. And for those of you that are having difficulties knowing what to say or what to do, just keep that in the back of your mind. I'm the voice of my child until my child's voice develops.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even after their voice develops, sometimes we have to continue to encourage them from a passive standpoint to advocate for themselves, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So, well, before we just dive right in, what are maybe some of the impediments people have to advocating for their child? What are some of the problems that we come up against? You know?
I think that oftentimes maybe parents feel a little bit intimidated by other professionals. They've done this for years. They're the professional when it comes to education. They're the professional when it comes to speech. I don't even know what I don't know. Yes. And so I think it's really important. And that's one thing that parents kind of maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed with, but also there's just so much to know and so much to do. It's almost like trying to drink from a fire hose. Where do I even start? And I know a lot of parents have voiced to me in my experiences of feeling like I don't want to say the wrong thing because I don't want them to take it out on my child. Or I don't want to make them upset and my child be the one that suffers.
Pays the price. Yeah.
Yes.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
That's one I've heard a lot. And so I think one of the first things that really parents need to do and focus on when they're thinking about or developing the skills to advocate for their child is to educate themselves on not only their child's needs, but also autism. What are the characteristics look like? What do my child's unique needs look like? Being able to understand those things from different angles and different complexities, and even understanding why people's perspectives might be a little bit different is really important, because then you can speak to it, right? Then you can talk about, well, this is what we do with my child, and this is why we handle it in this way versus maybe other ways you've seen it done. I think we always talk about your wife because she's amazing, but she's a perfect example of, she can tell you maybe why some information or why different treatments they don't line up, or they don't see eye to eye, or the perspective's different. And so being able to know both sides of those types of things is really important, because then you can kind of you can speak to it and say, well, this is this perspective and this is this perspective. And that's why they don't jive. I'm a big advocate of learning to sorry, I just cut you off.
No, I was thinking, do you think one of the problems may be that because autistic kids are all so different, and sometimes people want to kind of put your child in a box, if you will, or they have like a cookie cutter approach. And so, yes, you're taking them to a BCBA, and a BCBA is doing all the things that a BCBA does, but that might not be lining up with what's in the best interest for your child. So sometimes you have to be willing to step in and maybe even question somebody that's trained and educated, not to stop doing what they're doing, but to do what they're doing with your child in mind, instead of just kind of going through the motions or kind of checking the boxes, if you will.
Yeah, I would
Is that a
agree
fair
with it. Yeah.
representation? Yeah.
And I think that's a really good transition to the second point of having open communication with providers, with educators, with therapists, because if you come at them saying, why are you doing this? Or what's this? It can kind of set them off in this perspective of, oh, hold on, like almost go defense mode, right? Fight or flight.
Yes.
So I think really, it's really important when we're talking about communicating with people that we are open, we're approachable and friendly, very transparent. I like to use the term, help me understand, because I don't know. I know I don't know it all. And so instead of why are you doing that? Or why is this? That can kind of come off as questioning. And so can you help me understand what you're trying to get to here? How is this going to be beneficial? What are you working towards? I think is really important in that communication piece.
I love the phrase from Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He said, first seek to understand, then to be understood. And he said, you can't start getting somebody to understand you until you've taken the time to try to understand them. And I think that's just a great rule to follow here is I have to first understand where you're coming from and why you're saying what you're saying. I'll take the time to do that so that then I can help you to understand what I'm thinking in all of this.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. You were talking about the difference. Is it difference of opinion or difference of policy? Can you go a little bit more into that? It's kind of that perspective and what you meant by that?
Well, a lot of what I was thinking is maybe specifically when you're dealing with people that are working for maybe insurance companies or in the public schools and things like that. And sometimes you're being turned down because that person has a personal opinion of some type of specific situation here. They've looked at something and they've made a decision based on what their input is. And other times it's that you're bumping up against a policy that they can't do anything about. Okay. And you have to determine, am I up against a policy in that particular case, this person that I'm sitting across from can't do anything about that? Or am I bumping up against someone's misperception of what the situation is? And if there is a misperception, then I can do something about that. So you kind of have to define that. The other thing I think we were talking about, as I said, you have to kind of ask yourself, what are we disagreeing about? And let's define that. What is it that you're seeing that I'm not seeing? Or what is it that I'm seeing that you're not seeing? It goes to what you're saying, help me to understand is, let's first see, is there missing pieces in the information that either I have or you have that's causing us to make this decision that we don't necessarily agree with?
Because you may be arguing against a policy that person has zero control over, and all it's doing is making you frustrated and shutting down lines of communication that should really be open.
Absolutely. And you're making your day and somebody else's day horrible.
Yeah.
Let's don't add to misery in this world, right?
Right.
Let's be the salt and the light. Let's don't be the misery. Okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, as we talk about open communication, when we start that conversation, starting it from an approach of friendly and not being very standoffish and rude and direct in your communication, starting it off so that you're approachable. And even when we do that, we can communicate our displeasures or things that we're not happy with in a very proactive way without that person shutting down right from the start.
There's a principle in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that says always begin in a friendly way, right? And it never hurts to at least start that way. And that a way that cooperation can at least take place. Mm-hmm. Because basically, let's keep in mind, if we're advocating for our child, we're wanting your willing cooperation. That's what we're looking for, is your willing cooperation. If we're not getting your willing cooperation, there's a problem. So let's look at ways we can start with getting your willing cooperation.
So, Scott, have you ever experienced a time where you maybe had to advocate for Colby on his behalf and it was not going the way you had hoped? Or how did you handle that as a parent?
This was before Colby was diagnosed with autism. He had a very bad strep problem and he was having problems breathing. We had him in Cook's Children's Hospital, and they had taken one test, but not another. And the doctor hadn't been very communicative with us. And so I asked a nurse, I said, listen, I need to speak with his doctor. And she goes, well, she's busy right now. And I said, I understand that, but I need to speak with the doctor and we need to make that happen. So we spoke with the doctor and she said, well, I said, look, my son is not doing real well here and it's strep. And why can't we at least start him on some type of an antibiotic? And she kind of gave me we don't like to give too much antibiotics to kids these days. And I said, well, I understand that. But the reality is if we give him some antibiotic, it's not going to hurt him right now. And it could really help him. And so I was able to just kind of maybe change her mind a little bit. My wife says sometimes I can be intimidating. I don't want to be, but I've learned some techniques to say some things that can help get me what I want. And one of the things that we talked about last night, Megan, is I just used the phrase, that's not acceptable. You would be surprised people's response when you tell them that that's not acceptable. It's not accusatory or anything else. It just lets people know I'm not going to accept what you're recommending to me. That's not acceptable. We're going to have to come up with something else. Mm-hmm. And then it puts the problem back in their hands. It's like, oh, you mean I've got to solve this? That's not acceptable. Come up with something else.
Well, and that doesn't make it personable either, right? It's still solution driven. This solution is not going to work, so we have to find an alternative.
That's it. That's it.
Well, something I know that I mentioned at the beginning of our podcast is when we talk about advocacy and we use the term advocate, a lot of parents, their minds automatically go to an IEP, or in Texas known as an ARD, which is annual review and dismissal, which is the child's special education support systems in the academic school setting. And so I think these meetings can be very intimidating for parents. They're sitting in a room with sometimes up to 8 or 10 other people. And all of them have all kinds of alphabet soup behind their name. And they're going to talk about the different assessments they've done with their child and where they scored. And one of my personal pet peeves that I'm always try to make a point when I'm working with parents, or if I'm in a setting or an ARD meeting or an IEP meeting with a parent, is to break down the words and the language that professional is using so the parents can understand them. So often in these meetings, they'll be going over assessments and evaluations of the child, and they're throwing out standardized scores and different scores that the child made. And the parents have unless you do that for a living, you have no idea what those numbers mean. And so having parents, and unfortunately, as parents go through this process year after year, they get more experienced at it. But I think it's really important for parents to know their rights as a parent of a child with special needs that is receiving special education services in the school setting. One website that I really highly recommend parents look into is called Rights Law. It's WRIGHTS law.com. And it is a website that is designed to help parents advocate and educate themselves on their rights and their child's rights as it relates to their academic support systems within a school setting. And I also found last night when I was looking at this website, they have the top 10 questions parents ask. So like, what if I don't like the goals that are being proposed for my child? What if I don't like the services they're recommending? And it tells you exactly where in your child's rights that those questions fall and what your options are. So it's a really great web resource for parents to I definitely think they need to bookmark it and check it out. But knowing that and knowing what their rights are in those meetings and knowing that they can have an advocate in those meetings with them. It doesn't have to be somebody. There are advocates out there that can pay lots and lots of money to come sit in that meeting. You can have your child's outside therapist come and sit in those meetings. And I think those are perfect situations and settings for everybody to come together to collaborate and see how can we each support each other so that we can do what's in the best interest of this child.
One thought popped into my mind, Megan, is just because the other side of the table, let's say everybody else that you're dealing with, does this on a daily basis, doesn't necessarily mean that they know what the law is and what the rights for your child are. And it may require that the rules better than they do to help them see that they need to do something that you're advocating for. So what you may have to do is when you go in and you know that you're going to be advocating for something, have the rules. Look, I'm advocating for this because this is what this rule says, or this is what this law says, and I see that it fits into that box. And then you may have people on the other side of the table go, oh, wait, I didn't think about that. Just be prepared to tie your request to a specific point of law.
Absolutely.
Or a specific point or a specific rule or even a specific policy.
Yep.
So they know that you're not just asking it in general. Here's this request and it's based on this specific point.
There's a perfect, help me understand how these two things relate.
Yes. I love it. And by the way, those people that are listening to us, let me just tell you this about Megan. I had the opportunity to listen to recordings she made when she got into a discussion with a contractor that wasn't fulfilling their obligations. She is masterful and did it in a very loving, graceful way. I'm sure you did, Megan. But yeah, he knew he was dealing with a force of nature. I will say that. I loved it.
Yes. Well, and I'm happy to do that with insurance companies and schools for kids and parents too, because sometimes the emotions get tied into it so much that it's hard for parents to do that. And I absolutely understand that and respect that. And
Megan, let me ask this, because I know that one of the services you provide is advocate on a child's behalf. Can you attend some of these meetings like virtually in Zoom? If somebody wanted to hire you to be their be their advocate, you could be their advocate and attend through Zoom and help them get what they want.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
For sure. And help them understand they walk out of this IEP meeting or ARD meeting with this whole stack of documents. I don't even trying to decipher that as a job in itself, helping them understand what all of that means. How do I navigate this? How do I make sure the school is doing this and keeping the school accountable? What should I be expecting? I did talk with a parent a couple of weeks ago, actually, that the school had changed their child's goals multiple times to the point where it was like the school was trying to say, hey, they're not making progress on this goal, so we're just going to change it. And the mom's like, fine, like, at what point are we going to actually work on this so that he can master this skill? Because he has to have it. Instead of you changing the goal, change your teaching approach so that he masters this goal, right?
Right. Wow.
So,
well, and I know goals are important, and that is something that you have to negotiate as well, isn't it? I mean, just really knowing how to establish and hold people accountable for those.
Absolutely. And as you're advocating for your child, I think it's really important to know what goals do you want for your child? That could be academic goals. That could be life goals. That could be if they're attending a summer camp for the summer, what's your ultimate goal for them to be attending that? And being very specific about it. And those people that are involved in your child's life and in those different environments, letting them know this is what we're working towards. We are working towards him being able to, if it's a summer camp, we want him to be able to independently follow instructions in the whole group with all of his peers at summer camp. Or I think sometimes when we talk about parents, what's your ultimate goal for your child? What do you want them to be able to do? And they'll say, I want them to be as independent as possible. That's not a detailed goal. We need specific. I want them to be able to live as independently as possible, meaning they can bathe themselves, they can care for themselves, they can do their own laundry, they can cook a basic meal, they can live by themselves in a group home with other peers, with supports, whatever that goal is, being very specific and knowing where our end goal is so that we can plan backwards and make sure we're putting the right supports in place for them so that they get to that. And sometimes it's hard to think about when your child's 3 or 4 and just diagnosed, where am I going to see them at 18 and 20 and 21? And those goals may shift and change as they grow and develop and gain new skills.
Yes.
So
unfortunately, it takes a long time to figure it out, it seems like. Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, as we gain skills, as we improve in different areas, as different resources become available, those goals can shift and change as well.
Sure. How about understanding what your rights are?
Absolutely. So I think this really goes back to that rights law when we're talking about the educational piece and knowing what your child's IEP says, what its job is, what it's supposed to do, but also knowing your rights as a parent. and being able to advocate for your child. And Scott, I've kind of talked about having some guests on there, maybe to talk a little bit about guardianship and what does that look like. And that ties into these rights as well, not only for a parent, but also for a child. So we'll be hopefully visiting those kind of topics in a few weeks as well.
And in fact, let's just mention, I think we're going to be having an attorney that helped us draw up a lot of our special needs trust, guardianship, things like that, that they'll be on one of our shows coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So keep that in mind. And if you have any questions specific to that topic, let us know, because the guest I have in mind was great for us and help us navigate some what were much more difficult situations than I ever dreamed them to be in order to get a guardianship established for my son. So we want to be able to make that available, because in some cases you may not be ready to make those steps, but it may be time for you to start to learn what that looks like so that you can prepare yourself for it. Okay.
Yeah. I think the next piece kind of ties into just what you mentioned, is building a support network. That network looks very different at different stages in your child's life. It may be social media groups. It may be a local chapter of the Autism Speaks. It may be your small group within your church. It may be moms that attend therapy where your child attends, because you guys all drop your kids off at the same time and let's go have a cup of coffee, or let's go take a walk at the park while they're at treatment. And building that support network is so important, and knowing who you can go to and what resources they have and where they gain their knowledge and skill sets. I have had the opportunity to serve many families over my career, and so many of them I'm still in touch with. And I can't tell you how many times I get a call or a text of, hey, what do you know about this? Or, hey, what do you know about that? And I'm happy to share that information, because I know that I'm a resource for those families. And if I ever come across something that I think would be beneficial to them, I'm the first to send it out. Hey, I just saw this. You might want to look into this for so-and-so. And building that network of support, because those are also the people that you can say, okay, I just heard about this new and upcoming treatment and therapy. What do you know about it? And continuing to have those relationships with people.
And we've talked about that. It's critical. Just autism as a disease can be very isolating. And so however you can stay connected with other people, that can be a great resource for you. We're human beings. We are a social animal. We are meant to be connected to one another. So spend some time establishing those connections. It'll be important for you.
And again, kind of with that, just goes into the collaborating with those professionals and fostering those relationships with your child's healthcare professionals, your therapists. Speech is sometimes a 2 or 3 session, 30 minutes a week type of visit. Take some time and go and sit in those sessions with your child and say, what are we doing? How are we work on? How can I continue to do this at home? How do we make sure that he's doing this outside of these 4 walls? What does that look like? Is there an opportunity for me to meet with you one-on-one without the child, so that I can better dive into what you're working on with him and how I can help support that treatment outside of his direct sessions or her direct sessions? And I think it's really important also to be aware of different perspectives of others. Sometimes, and so often in different social media groups, I see a parent say, hey, what are your thoughts on ABA? Or does anybody's child have ABA? And then there's this whole list of people that are like, how terrible ABA is and how horrible it was and their experience. I think it's so important. We have to remember that treatment is only as good as the person providing it. And just because somebody had a bad experience with a specific treatment, whether that be speech, OT, ABA, whatever, doesn't mean that that whole treatment is bad. It may be that experience for that family was just not a positive thing. So being able to collaborate and say, why would people say that this experience is bad or they had a negative experience? And it could be a very personal thing. It could have been just because of the provider. It could have been their child wasn't quite ready for that. And the parents maybe weren't totally on board with the treatment plan that had been put into place. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing, but just to consider, like if your goals and objectives for your child don't align with the treatment that's being proposed, that's okay. That's okay.
Sure.
A couple other things here we've got is just documenting and tracking your child's progress in their treatment and the things that they're receiving. I do have an excellent resource on my website. That's a medical binder I created that has all kinds of different tabs and places to keep that information, so it's all in one place. And that way, when your child's going for an annual checkup or to go for a reevaluation or for their ARD meeting or IEP meeting, you can grab that binder and take it and say, here's what they've been working on in speech, here's what they've been working on in OT, can you take a look at this so we make sure we're all on the same page and we're working to what's in the best interest of my child? So
we've talked about that before, and how critically important it is that everything is in a single location that you can get immediately. Any correspondence with insurance companies, everything else. If you haven't started your binder yet, take a moment and go to Megan's website and start that process. You will thank us at some point that we encouraged you to do that, because that's just so critical that you take that. And yeah, there you go. Haupert Consulting, and get you a nice big thick binder too. Okay. Now, don't go get one of those cheap ones. I mean, you're gonna have to go to Staples or Office Depot or someplace like that and get a big one.
And you're just going to get frustrated when you have to take it out of the small binder and move it to the big one. It's just going to be frustrating. So just get the big 4-inch.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it look like you're a corporation, and that's where all your important documents are.
It will also be intimidating when you slam it on the table, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me talk to you about a few things.
Whoa. Last couple things I have is just self-advocacy, teaching your child as they grow and develop that they can advocate for themselves and what that looks like, using their own voice, using their own words. If they don't like something or they're not interested in doing something, let's address it. Let's teach them how to appropriately advocate for themselves and foster that independence. When they can do and engage in skills that they're able to do independently, making sure that those things are being addressed and making sure that we are doing those things. And I think the last thing is the most important is just to stay positive and persistent. You're going to win somebody's respect and admiration when you are approachable, and don't take every comment or question in defense. Take the perspective that when they're asking something or making a comment, it's an opportunity to educate them and help them understand. I know it's so much easier said than done. I get it. When people are talking about our family, our kids, we are like going to mama bear mode. It's fight or flight. And we have to be able to kind of catch ourselves and take a deep breath and say, okay, are they saying this to make me mad, or are they saying because they just are really uneducated and don't know? Yes. And I would like to think most people in life are saying things that they don't because they don't know. They're not just trying to be a jerk. But even if they are just trying to be a jerk, the way that you respond is going to speak way more to your character of how you handle that than how they are as a person. And so always take those opportunities to educate and say, okay, they're just saying this, and maybe they have a hard time with words. Sometimes people do, right? They have a hard time getting their points across using appropriate words and language, and things get all jumbled. But this is an opportunity for me to educate because they don't know. And so I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to tell them so they know next time. And treating those as just kind of an inquiry for information of, oh, well, this is why, this is how, and this is why we eat Mexican every Wednesday night with Colby, because it makes my life easier.
Maybe I could recommend a book too. There's a book that I just finished reading that's a really great book. It's called Unoffendable, and it's written from a Christian perspective. And it's very helpful for you to see that in Christianity, for years, we've kind of enjoyed our righteous anger, right? We're right. And Jesus got angry. He turned over the tables in the temples, and we have every right to act like Jesus in those situations as well. And in reading this book, I began to temper my temper, if you will, and to really be able to appreciate that we don't have a right to just be angry about things. And we do have to be gentle, and we do have to be caring, and we do have to reach out and be gracious to people. So that book, Unoffendable, I have recommended it to a lot of folks, and it's a bestseller right now. So shouldn't have a problem finding it really strongly. It's a great way to build your faith as well. So
it's actually on my reading list as soon as I finish my John Maxwell book about 16 effective communication laws or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
But
we're going to swap reading lists one of these days.
I have my notes section of anytime Scott mentions a book, I add it to my list of books I need to read. So
I only recommend the good ones. So
I think kind of talking about how we can advocate for our children and best ways and approaches to do that. I think it's a good topic for us to be able to kind of shift a little bit to faith, and how does all of that tie into faith? And I believe, from my perspective, when we are interacting and engaging and advocating for our children, and we have those opportunities to talk with people, sometimes we need to extend grace whenever we are communicating and having those conversations. As humans, we were built for relationship with each other. Relationships can get complicated and messy because people are complicated and messy, right?
Yes.
So as we're advocating for our child, I think it's really important. The one thing that we need to put at the forefront of our mind is grace, and what exactly is grace. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what's that defined as, what's it look like, and how does that transform into advocating for my child. And so as grace is defined as undeserved favor, it can't be earned, it's freely given. It's a willingness to be fair and honest. And so when we're dealing with people or interacting with people and advocating for our children, I think it's important that we have this willingness to be fair and to be honest and transparent in our communication with them. So, Scott, in preparing for this podcast, I actually was doing some research last night on grace and what does that look like and what's it defined as. And I came across a recording by John Piper titled, "What is Grace?" And he notated that there are 124 mentions of grace in the New Testament alone, 86 of which were from the Apostle Paul.
Well, I think Paul is such an interesting character. Paul was probably the most egotistical apostle there was. I mean, if you read between the lines, Paul had a pretty solid ego, without a doubt. He never had a problem going up and telling people what he thought, right? But at the same time, when you read Paul's writings, you can see that he's constantly having to remind himself to be humble. And I'm reminded that in some of the letters that he wrote, he started them off as Paul, a bondservant of Jesus. What could be more lowly than a bondservant of someone else? So, one of the ways I think that we keep steady and faithful in a time of conflict is we have to remind ourselves, now's the time to be humble. Let's take another serving of humility here, and let's not let ourselves get too self-important and remind ourselves that we've got to be humble.
And if we extend grace to those that we're interacting with as we're advocating for our child, obviously having a child with a disability can be incredibly challenging from all types of different angles. But if Paul can speak about grace 86 times, being imprisoned, being on death row essentially for his faith, how much more can we advocate from a place and extend grace from where we're sitting?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
If we're going to be followers of Jesus, I think it's really important that we note what Jesus told his followers to do. And he told us to freely, you have in Matthew 10:8, Jesus talks to the apostles. He says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. I have not done any of those. I've been working really hard at those.
Yeah.
But, we have been given grace. And so we are supposed to freely give that as well. And so I think that one is a little bit more obtainable than driving out demons and cleansing leprosy. So I'm going to shoot for that one. Okay. Hopefully others will join me in that. But I think it's just really important as we are interacting and we're advocating for our kids to just take that perspective of extending grace to others. It's only going to pay off tenfold for our kiddos.
Well, one of the things that I heard here recently in a sermon, and this is important because Jesus calls us to a life of service. And sometimes I think as parents of special needs kids, we think service is SERVEUS, serve us, instead of service, which is SERVICE. Regardless of our situation, regardless of our circumstances, we are called to a life of service, which is focused on others. And even when we're in the midst of trying to get things for our child, we're still called to a life of serving others and to be other focused and be outwardly focused and to be bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. That's what we're called to do. And we've got to be constantly doing that. So hopefully maybe keep that in mind. Is how is service being delivered in your life? Is it from you to others, or is it all from others to you?
And it doesn't have to be anything big. When we're serving others, it can be something small as you have walked the journey of the autism diagnosis and you come across a mom who just received that same thing, and just being there to encourage her, being an ear for them to talk with, and dropping off a meal, sending a gift card for a carry-out meal, because you know how challenging it can be to try to get all your kids rounded up and dinner made and all the things. So just little things are just as valuable when it comes to serving others as the big things.
Absolutely. Well, Megan, we're pretty close to the time that we have allotted for the program, but I know we've got a lot of things we want to ask people for and to follow up. What are some of the things we're going to ask people to do as a result of this program?
We would love to have them share any questions or topics they'd like for us to cover. They can check us out on our Facebook page as well as our Instagram. Send us a direct message on those social media platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get the updates automatically every time we launch one of our new episodes. And then also check out my website, haupertconsulting.com. I've got plenty of different resources on there, some information about different approaches for autism interventions and some different resources. So I'd love for people to check that out. And if you like what you're hearing, share us so that other people can hear what we have to say too. So
yes. And then if you're in the North Tarrant County area or West Tarrant County area, I'd like to invite you to be a part of our church, the Hills Church. If you're looking for a church home that has special needs services, each one of our campuses has a special needs minister along with special needs classes on Sundays. We have different respite nights for families with special needs kids. We want to be a welcoming congregation to those families that have special needs kids. So if you would like more information, feel free to contact me through email at the show or my own personal email. I'll make sure that you get routed to the right direction. We want to be a service congregation to you and your family. If you're looking for a place to be on Sundays, we'd love it if you would join us. And then we mentioned, Megan, we've got some upcoming shows on legal issues and financial planning. If you've got any questions, feel free to send us a question on one of those things. And guys, if you haven't gotten something from tonight, I don't know when you ever will, but take Megan's advice. If you need any more information, please feel free to contact her. She can also be a great advocate for you. If you're needing somebody in your corner for some of these meetings, she'll leave them knowing she was there. Okay. Megan, I think that's it. It's been a pleasure getting to talk with you again tonight. And for those of you who are able to join us, we really appreciate your loyalty and listening to the show. Hope that you found this to be a blessing for you. Can't wait for you to join us on our next program.
Yes. Thank you, guys.